Fantastic. Hi, everybody. I'm Anna. I'm the Executive Director at the Food Foundation and really delighted to be here. Thanks so much for coming to join us. We really want to have this, open this up as an opportunity to talk about food issues with all of you and hear about the issues that you're concerned about or you might have questions for the panel on. The title of our session is Food, Glorious Food. And the question that we're grappling with is how do we feed ourselves sustainably, affordably, and securely? And I think it's probably fair to say that in the last at least few months, probably last few years, food issues have been pretty prominent in the headlines, not least, of course, at the moment that we've got extremely high food inflation, close to 20%. And obviously, what we've been experiencing here in the UK is one part of a much bigger global challenge around access to good food, which I'm sure Johnny's going to touch on a little bit when he speaks. We've had a period of the year when we had shortages of fruits and vegetables, or vegetables in particular, coming in the spring because of problems in Spain and Morocco linked to climate change. We've seen rapidly rising demand for food banks across the country. We've had the Prime Minister swing in and convene a summit to discuss these issues with farmers and with supermarkets. We're now seeing more recently an announcement that we're going to start introducing injections for people that are struggling with their weight in the form of sort of appetite suppressants. And we've seen today on the news that the government's decided to roll back on its commitment to introduce a ban on multi-buys of junk food, delaying that legislation for another couple of years. So there's every other day we've got something around food that's in the headlines. And I'm hoping that in today's conversation we'll have an opportunity to dig into some of those issues, hear your perspectives, and have an opportunity to draw on the great expertise that we have across the panel. So we're going to start with Laiba Mahmood, who is a young food campaigner, and she is a young food ambassador for the organisation that I work for, the Food Foundation. We're going to start with her work as a campaigner, and then we're going to just gradually zoom out and hear from the other panelists in turn. And then we want to get straight into hearing your thoughts and comments. So we won't spend too long with the panel. We will definitely come back to them, but we're keen to open the conversation up as quickly as possible. So do get ready with your thoughts and ideas and questions. So over to you, Laiba. Fantastic to have you with us.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Anna mentioned, I'm Laiba Mahmood. I am a student at the Halifax Academy. Currently, I'm in year 10. And today I will be talking about from food. And it's from a student's point of view. And it's really important because it's like a personal point of view, which we all need to hear. And most importantly, how I think we can feed ourselves sustainably, securely, and affordably. So firstly, the only reason I became a food ambassador for the Food Foundation and in general is because I've seen the impact not having enough food has on children and their entire life. My mom is an example of this. So my grandfather was extremely poor to the point that they had to go hungry for many days. They would even eat bread with water. And that had a direct impact on my mom and my aunt's education because they went to school, but they were not getting education. And it's exactly the same with students in this country. They're going to school, but how do you expect them to get education while they're thinking about, oh, will we get any food? Oh, is it going to be good? Will we have enough to eat? Will we survive until tomorrow? Can anybody hear our stomach rumble? How are those students supposed to get education with all these thoughts going in their head? So my mom's story, it is from Pakistan, but we all can agree that the impact of food is same on a child wherever you are, and the education as well. So one main important thing is that it's not only when they're young. When they grow up, it impacts their entire life. So, for example, my mom, She could not get a good education, but it's impacting her now after 20 years. So for basic tasks like our parents' evening, she needs someone to go with her. It's 20 years later, and you're still seeing those impacts. My aunts, we are so far apart, and whenever there's an opportunity that they can come in this country, they can't even pass the basics of tests. 20 years later, and that's a long time. It's affecting their entire life. So this is the only and main reason, because we think about free school meals as a fact that, oh, it's only for children. But we don't think about the fact that those children will grow up to become adults who will struggle through life every single day. And this is where we come to our first point about sustainability. From a student's point of view, sustainability is like something which can go on for a really long time, and it will not have any negative impacts. So first of all, if we provide free school meals for every single child, you're stopping so many lives from being ruined. And secondly, it's very important, the climate bit of it. If you people eat meat, and that's relatively more affecting the climate change more than vegetables. And in our school, it's really shocking as well. In our school, we have 1,200 plus students, excluding staff. And when we asked, nobody, and I repeat, nobody in our school was vegan or vegetarian. That's a huge impact on climate. So if we give free school meals to children, first of all, you're promoting all these vegetable and healthy foods, and children are more adaptable. So they will eat all these vegetable-filled dishes, and they will go home, and when they grow up, they will carry on eating those. So it's like a domino effect. But also, you're encouraging, like even when you're giving them, schools and the government ultimately can decide what to give the children. So give them vegetables, let them enjoy it, let them know that there's so many options, and also reduce the climate change crisis. Secondly, we come to the point of feeding securely. I mean, I want to ask you, what's more secure than knowing that you will have a free school meal, a healthy, nutritious, hot meal every single day? What's more secure than that? And secondly, this is a stat that if we provide free school meals to a child, the parents save £450 per child every single year. And that's a lot of money. So that will make the food security for the parents as well. They will be more secure in what they can eat. And lastly, the affordability. Anything that's made on a huge scale is cheaper than something which is made on individually. So if schools are making food for 1,200 plus students, it will be cheaper than 1,200 plus students bringing their own free school, their own meals, which is going to be way more affordable for the government. And then, as I mentioned, all the money that the parents will be saving will also affect the adults in the lives of all those children, because then they will have more money to spend. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Laiba. Very energising kickoff. We're going to move to Chloe now. Chloe Smee, who is works at the Soil Association and works in a lot of schools thinking about how we can really support and create good food environments for children as they grow up. So, Chloe, over to you.
Thank you. I feel like Laiba has raised so many issues there that could keep us talking for an hour. But I'll share a few points from my perspective. As well as working for the Soil Association's Food for Life programme, where we work with schools and nurseries and public health teams up and down the country to support provision of healthy and sustainable school meals, as well as setting the habits of a lifetime for those children to ensure that they understand where their foods come from, they've got the tools to be able to cook and grow and understand good food. I was also involved about 13 years ago in founding Edible York, which is a local food charity, which was driven to provide more access to communities, more access to community space to grow and work with their community to produce fresh, affordable fruit and vegetables, and again, learn the tools that they need to be able to enjoy that produce in their community. In thinking about today's panel, obviously it's a very powerful title, Food, Glorious Food, which I'm sure brought to mind for many of you, as it did for me, pallid Oliver Twist with his hands raised. Please, sir, can I have some more? All seared in our collective consciousness. Obviously, the workhouse has been eradicated today, but it's really frightening what food price inflation and an insecure food system has done to food access in this country over the past 15 or so years. In fact, it was on a webinar that Food Foundation led just earlier this week, Anna, that fantastic local academic Bob Doherty was quoting the figure that today in the UK, our second biggest food store collectively is represented by food banks. That's a very, very scary statistic for all of us to absorb. Families are really struggling to feed themselves. We've got a food system in which 1 in 5 children start school already living with overweight or obesity. We've got a food system that's a major contributor to our national greenhouse gas emissions that we just can't get a grip on. And Sarah is the best person to talk to us about that today. We've got a food system in which around 60% of the diet of our very youngest children is constituted of ultra-processed foods, which arguably are not foods, but are industrially produced edible substances, I think, which is what Chris Van Tulleken catchily refers to them as. Our food system is broken. It's really hard to comprehend, and it's a complex issue. But I think today we've got a great opportunity to see whether York can tell a different story about food. What if every child in York could enjoy the kind of healthy free school meal that Laiba has just described? What if the food being bought collectively by our schools in York was helping regenerative local growers and producers to thrive? What if communities had access to fresh fruit and vegetables and could feel confident that they could bring that produce into their family home without worrying overly about spend or food waste? It might all sound fanciful, but those things aren't very far away. They're all within our grasp in York. So I'd really like to hear everybody's thoughts on that today. And really, I guess the question that I'd like to frame for us here is, what is food for? And to think about that, because that question is really manipulated by the industrial pressures that sell food to us. I'd also like to just make one more caveat about today's conversation, and I'd really like to encourage us all to think about systemic issues and try not to individualise food too much. It can be a very emotive issue, particularly when you're talking about weight. And so I'd really like to encourage us all to think systemically and think about how we can effect change on that system without necessarily attributing blame or individualising that issue. So, yeah, that's my intro thoughts.
Very good points, Chloe. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to move on to Sarah, Professor Sarah Bridle, who is a professor at the University of York here. And she's an author as well, Food and Climate Change Without the Hot Air. This book is going to be available afterwards over here if you'd like to buy a copy. And I can really recommend it. It's a really amazing insight into, I read it a little while ago when you were pre-publication, and you can pick a food and you uncover the climate story of that food as you go through the book. It's wonderful. So thoroughly recommend it. Sarah, tell us.
Thank you.
About some of these issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and for your kind words. So I guess I'm really motivated by the impact that food has on climate change. And not many people realise, at least it was a big surprise to me when I first started looking into this, that actually it turns out about 1/3 of all climate change is caused by food. And I'm guessing I don't need to convince you guys about climate change, but there's a fantastic T-shirt here in the second row with the climate stripes. Yep, excellent. So you can see there the change in temperature over the last 150 years or so. And this year not on it yet. I think we might need a new colour for that one. But so basically food is contributing about 1/3 of that climate change. And in fact, most of the food contributions to climate change are not to do with fossil fuels. So we definitely do need to stop burning the fossil fuels. But when we do, food will be the largest contributor to climate change. And in fact, food alone is on course to cause 2 degrees of warming by the end of the century. So we need to change our food system. Our food system is not fit for that future. And in fact, if we don't change the food system voluntarily, climate change is changing the food system for us. And so as we're talking about resilience there, and Chloe mentioned about food stores, and some of my research is about what would happen if there was some food disaster where we actually couldn't get hold of enough food. Wonderful projects like Edible York, helping people to learn what it is to actually be able to grow our own food as well. So there's a lot of interesting topics there. Really today, what I'm really excited to be able to share with you information about how different foods contribute to climate change. Most people have a guess about the relative impacts of different foods. So I could ask you, how much do you think a steak would cause climate change compared to baked potato and beans? I'm guessing, I don't know, did anyone want to vote? Anyone going to vote for the steak? Hands up. So a few people. Anyone going to vote for the potato and beans causing more climate change than the steak? We've got a couple of people there. Great. So the majority of you that voted there were getting the right order, but many people are very surprised about the size of the difference. So it's actually about a factor of 20 more climate change. So the steaks like this, jacket potato and beans like that, if you have an 8-ounce steak compared to a microwave potato and beans. So very often people underestimate the size of the difference. And also there's lots of details there we could go into about where the steak comes from, how that potato was prepared, for example. So I'd love to answer any questions you've got about that sort of thing for other foods as well. But this is really good news, because actually it turns out that if different foods contribute different amounts to climate change, it means that there's something we can do about it, because if all foods contributed about the same, we'd be stuck. And so this really means that there's a big opportunity if we can learn about how different foods contribute to climate change to affect our own diets. But of course, totally agree with Chloe on the systemic change point there, that it's not really, it is actually impactful if many individual people change their diets, because supermarkets respond in a non-linear way to dietary preferences of a small group of people. We can have an impact. But really what's needed, and Laiba mentioned this about the procurement for schools, for example, the big opportunity we have to really change the environment of what food is available easily to us. And if we can really work together to do that, then we can have a much more transformative effect. And it's really exciting to be working with partners on projects like Fix Our Food, working with the Food Foundation here in York, for example, led by Bob Doherty that you mentioned a moment ago, working with Good Food York as well, and organisations like that. So really an opportunity. Yorkshire is actually leading the way on this, from colleagues like Maria Bryant at the back there, who are working together with other organisations to really ensure that we have, for example, school meals available to the people that actually are, qualified to get them without them having to jump through hoops. So there's a huge amount going on in Yorkshire, and a real opportunity to make a difference and lead the country into a transformed food system. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Fantastic. We're going to move to Johnny. Lord Johnny Oates, who leads the United... Oh, no, I'm going to get it wrong again now. Sorry, Johnny. United Action Against Malnutrition and Hunger. So we're zooming out now. We're taking a bit of a global perspective on the issues that we began with children's food and what children are eating globally. Johnny is also an author, a different kind of book. I've had this story in synopsis from Johnny when I first met him, and I was kind of like hanging on every word. I can fully recommend the book. I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, and again, it will be available afterwards. I imagine that you'll both be signing, will you?
Absolutely.
Signing as well. There you go. So Johnny, zoom us out and let's talk about this issue from a global perspective.
Thanks very much, Anna. So as Anna said, I'm the chief executive of an organisation called United Against Malnutrition and Hunger, and this came into being following the cuts to the UK's aid budget back in 2020, And that led in turn to an 80% reduction in the UK's aid on its global nutrition budget, which obviously had massive consequences around the world, particularly coming at the time it did with the impacts of COVID and then subsequently the conflict resulting from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and massively impacted also by climate change, which other panelists have been talking about. As I think everybody who's here knows, nutrition is absolutely foundational. It's critical to people, whether they are in the UK or whether they're around the world. It's foundational to development, foundational to the development of individuals, but also foundational to economic and social development in societies. And so it really, as Laiba explained a bit, you can have programs to send people to school, etc., but if they're not properly nourished, they can't take full advantage of that. The statistics at the moment are really terrifying. There's 3.1 million children expected to die this year from malnutrition. Malnutrition is the leading cause of death among children around the world. And beyond those shocking statistics are the many, many more children who survive but aren't able to reach their full potential as a result of not being properly nourished. And Laiba made the point that that's not a time-limited thing. That has an impact throughout people's lives, and it has an impact on people's societies. So what we really want to do is to get the UK back on track in terms of playing its role at tackling malnutrition and hunger around the world, as well as doing what it should be doing at home, and at a time when there are so many different pressures on systems. And there's an obvious reason why we should care about this, because it's simply wrong that people around the world are being impacted like this. But even if that moral argument isn't powerful enough for us, there are some very important self-interested reasons why we should do this, because a hungry world in which there is a lack of food security will not be a safe world, will not be a stable world. And we've seen the impacts in, it was a food crisis that led to the Arab Spring, which metastasized into conflicts in Syria, in Yemen, and Lebanon, which have spread their impact around the world. So even if we didn't care as we should about the moral imperative, we need to think about those things. And finally, if we want societies around the world to develop economically to the benefit of their people, but also to the benefit of the world as a whole, those societies can only do that if there is proper access to nutritious food. So there are lots of questions that come out about that. How do we deliver food systems that deliver not just enough food, but enough nutritious food? But how do we deliver political and economic systems that really allow food justice around the world, which is a critical part of that? And so I'm really pleased to be taking part in this discussion. It's really great to be here with Laiba, particularly because I was 15 when I first got involved with these issues. I'm glad to see that this isn't being left to the older people like us, because we tend to get things wrong. I think young people tend to get things more right. So real pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. So we'd like to open it up now. And great.
So I know that on your list of concerns was food security and, of course, fossil fuel emissions driving climate change. So I am a vegetarian, I'm pleased to be able to say. And because I work for myself and I work from home, I can go to my local market, which happens on a Monday and a Friday, which is a local farmer. He's grown a lot of the produce himself. He knows when he sees me coming that I will only buy food that was sourced from within the UK. And he's half the price of the local supermarket. So the idea that I source my stuff from the UK, that it hasn't been trucked or flown halfway across the world generating fossil fuel emissions, and that my source supply is relatively secure, that if Spain has a drought and the tomatoes aren't coming, I'm going to be all right because I know that I source over here from the UK. So I mentioned this at a talk at the Hay Literary Festival recently on the same subject, and I was surrounded by civil servants from the Welsh Government in Cardiff, and they absolutely loved what I said, but afterwards they got quite fierce with me and said, it's all right for you, but we're in the office, or they were then, it was pre-COVID, we're in the office from 9 to 5. We can't possibly go to a market, because he comes on Mondays and Fridays. We can't go to our local market, even if there is one, they lived in Cardiff, at 9 o'clock on a Monday or a Friday morning, we're working. And it's lovely for you that it's half the price of the supermarket, but we can't access it. And it's lovely for you that it's mostly locally sourced, but we can't access it. So what about access locally to affordable, locally grown food for people like them? Thank you.
Great question. Chloe, you're going to jump in?
We're on. Yeah, it's a really fantastic point. And yeah, really, I was having a similar chat in Sainsbury's earlier today with a neighbour complaining about food price rises and recognising that they don't hit us all equally. A nutritious diet is significantly more expensive than an unhealthy diet in this country at the moment. I think around 3 times more expensive calorie by calorie. So obviously, if you're in a situation where you're struggling to pay your bills and you want meals on the table that are where you're going to have low food waste, you know your children are going to be sated, you know that food's not going to go off, and you haven't got much choice about how much that food bill can stack up to, you're going to lean towards the cheaper food options. And in this country, those food options that are more heavily subsidised are those that are generally ultra processed, and I think that's why it's such a major disappointment to hear that Rishi Sunak today has reneged on his commitment to address unhealthy buy one get one free offers. This kind of illusion that the government are doing people a favour by supporting a market that makes unhealthy food more affordable than it should be, and the framing of that as if it's an act of benevolence, I think it is really crass. And I think we need to challenge the government to do more and to step up. The National Food Strategy, which the government commissioned, talked about creating more taxes on high-fat, sugar, salt food, and the buy one get one free policy was intended to address those sorts of foods and not buy one get one free on food. So buy one get one free. I'm so used to saying bog off. It's very hard to when you try to spell it out. It was due to address unhealthy bog offs, not healthy bog offs. So yeah, it's really crude the way the government are framing it, and as if people that are challenging the availability and the cheapness of unhealthy foods are doing people that are struggling to pay their bills a disservice. I think it's a really cruel framing.
Thanks. So I thought you might want to pick up on the sort of food miles, like local market points, that there's quite a lot in there, which I imagine are well revealed in the book. But
Okay, yeah, great. So thank you for your question. Yeah, lots of points that that you raised there. I could comment on some of those great comments from Chloe as well. But just to answer the point that Anna mentioned there, yeah, there's different issues with where you get your food from, I suppose, and there is a misconception, a very widespread misconception about food miles that Tim Lang, who actually coined the phrase, he was actually trying to coin it for the opposite reason. He was actually trying to explain that actually bringing food from a long way away by boat actually doesn't cause a lot of climate change, for example. So once you put that food on the boat, then the boats move very smoothly. You can fit a lot of food onto a boat. Whereas if they come by air, then it causes about 100 times as much climate change if you bring the same thing by air than by boat. So there is a lot of misconception about the climate impact of food traveling a long way. And for example, a banana. I don't want to spoil this book. There's a great book by Mike Berners-Lee called "How Bad Are Bananas?" I don't want to spoil it for you, but the answer to that specific question is not that bad. Yes, so it turns out that shipping a banana from the other side of the world causes a very similar amount of climate impact to actually producing that banana, and all of that is very, very small compared to most of the things that we would be eating on a daily basis. But you raised other points there. It's not just about climate impact, as you say, it's about food security as well. And so certainly if we did, as Johnny's already alluded to, the geopolitical problems, potential wars and more wars that could be caused by the increasing impacts of climate change on food production globally, could mean that we have issues with trade coming into the UK. And since we know that a significant amount of our food is actually imported, then supporting UK production would be very relevant in that situation. So definitely different issues there. Just to comment on, there's not only the convenience of being able to get hold of that food, but of course for people who don't have the time to prepare that food, then there's the time issue. If you're buying food direct from the farmer, they might need a lot of cleaning and sorting out before it's really a meal that is going to be recognisable to hungry children, for example, and a risk in changing a diet that the food might be then rejected by those children. So there's a lot of factors that need to be taken into account in order to make this a lot easier for people to access the kind of healthy food that you're advocating for. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Let's bring in, I think, you had the microphone. Go ahead, yeah.
Great. With climate, there are kind of three sectors. There's basically oversimplified electricity. We can do renewable energy, not doing it quick enough. Hard to abate sectors, things like transport, hydrogen, we can do that. And the thing that fills me with despair, we're never ever going to do it, is the food system, which is, he says, third emissions. If I think, and this is a sweeping statement, but I dare any of you to disagree with this, the best thing that we could do for the planet is everyone going vegan, right? And I could explain why in great detail, and I'm sure Professor Sarah could do that. But if we were to do, governments around the world, no one not tackling this, not telling their people you have to cut down on your meat consumption, and if they did, it would totally destroy the very powerful meat and dairy industries. So how do we even start that conversation, number one? And secondly, a sort of slightly related question, do you think that cultured meat is a potential solution? I know it's very expensive at the moment, but it could, if it followed the the path of solar energy, for example, down the cost curve, it could feasibly become competitive with raw meat, and similarly for cultured dairy products.
Great. Meat and veganism and cultured meat. I want to hear just from one more in the audience, then we're going to come back, because I want to make sure we have a breadth of issues that everybody can comment on. Yes, thank you.
First, thank you very much. It's a really important topic. I come from a farming community, and the first question you asked was, what's the role of food? And what I don't hear in the conversation in different panels around the world is the cultural side to it, human behavior, or the emotional side attached to it. And I'm on a quest to learn what actually can we do about this, and what are some of the actual solutions. And some parts that I've just going, is that really true? Like somebody explained, hey, as a bag of spinach in 1950, you've now got to eat, I think it was 17 bags of the same spinach to get the same nutrients. And I noticed in your intro, you didn't say nutrients. I was like, is that true? So I flew to Italy, we're like, you're telling me the soil has changed that much? And I learned all about fertilizers. And then I learned it is somebody's job in ultra-processed foods to turn off the communication between brain and stomach so we keep eating more. And I go, what the is that? Does it play another role? Absolutely not. And I'm like, morally, as a society, are we going to stand for that? And I don't think we should, but there's just that awareness. And so I'm an entrepreneur, done it in different sectors where we're disrupting, and I'm now going industry. You do not have the best talent of business if you want private sector to come into this. You need talent and capital to start off with. And how do you attract the best talent? So I've been on a global quest, just come back from Israel. Then I was in the Middle East to look at the food system there. And then before that, Singapore. So I've tasted all the cultivated meat stuff. And the GFI, I went to Meat Pro because I wanted to meet the people. And wow, they are powerful. 55,000 people on day one. And I'm like, this industry is powerful. So my question is, if you want the best entrepreneurs, the best business, what do you want us to do? Because we've knocked on some doors and there's a lot of silence coming back. And my second question is, what would help you the most? And the conversation I've heard so far at Radix is, I shouldn't be political, but everybody big and banging about politics. And I'm like, yes, but what's actually done? What do you need? We're all on the same team here. We've all agreed it's broken. What do we need to do? Like, can we just get on with that question? Because if not...
So can I just clarify, is your question like, what's the sort of new frontier in terms of food production and manufacturing that is going to solve some of these issues that have been talked about?
What problem do you want entrepreneurs to focus on?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And second, what would help you, each of you, to actually do what you're doing better? Because I think everybody here has agreed that it's broken. So how can we help you?
Great, thank you. Very meaty stuff to get into here, folks. Laiba, would you like to give some reflections to kick us off? And then we'll go to Johnny.
So I will answer both questions in one. And your question, I feel like from a student's point of view, you asked, what do I want you to do, which will help us? And I want you and everybody here to encourage the government to have free school meals for everyone. And it comes back to your point, because nobody needs to go, like, we don't have to say, oh, all you can eat is vegetables. But if we promote vegetables in school and children are eating it with their friends, enjoying these healthy meals, they are most likely and definitely going to go home and tell their parents, oh, could you make this? We had this at school. And secondly, if the government is giving us the funds and the necessity that we need to have free school meals for everyone, we will have more people who will be like you and who will ask those questions. They're like, what do we need to improve the world? Because their world has been improved by something so small. And I feel like student-wise and education-wise, we need free school meals for everybody, because every student should have a level playing field. You can say that it's free education, but is everybody really getting the same type of education? No, because some people get food, some people don't, and it has a huge impact.
Thanks, Laiba. That was a definite call to action there. Johnny, it would be great to hear your thoughts on the point about should we all be vegan. Obviously, when we look at the global statistics, per capita, we're one of the highest consuming nations of meat, but many of the children that you're talking about in your work, the picture's quite different. So maybe bring a global perspective into that, and of course, any other reflections.
Sure. I mean, I think on the question of whether everybody should be vegan, I think governments attempting to impose on people what they can and can't eat is going to be a very difficult thing to do, frankly, and possibly impossible. But I mean, I think what there needs to be is kind of a lot more education about food availabilities, about what is nutritious, etc. We got lots of problems with, I mean, quite apart from the issue of how much meat we consume, is how much unnutritious food we consume. And that's a real problem in the UK. But there's a problem around the world, obviously, that we have even people who aren't necessarily hungry, in the sense that they're getting enough food to feel full, they are not getting the nutrition that they need. And that is a real issue. It's an issue about how food is grown and consumed, and it's about access to markets, it's about storage, it's about about a whole range of issues, which we need to tackle both in order to address the problems of malnutrition around the world, but also in terms of tackle some of the questions around climate, etc., that we've had. But these are big political issues because they are about will. They are about the willingness of political leaders to actually lead and actually, tell some hard truths. And there's also a role, for the public. We have to be prepared to accept some hard truths and hard choices. And I think that's one of the problems in a lot of this debate, that the politicians aren't taking the lead, but one of the reasons they're not taking a lead is they get punished when they do. And I think our media has a role to play in this. I mean, a classic domestically on this buy one get one free is how that's been cast. And as I can't remember, it was Chloe who said it, but that it's been cast as if the government's doing a favour for people when they clearly aren't. And then just to come to the question of what would I want people to do? I mean, what we want to happen is we want the UK government to understand, recognise and act on the fact that we can't live in a secure and stable world unless people are getting the food they need and the nutritious food that they need. And if that's going to happen, the UK needs to play its part at the heart of global efforts to combat this problem, which is complex because it involves complexities about reforming the food system, but it's also simple in some ways because there is emergency things we can do now that we used to do that we're not doing, and a lot of people are suffering. So what I'd really like everybody here to do is, one, recognise how important this issue is, not just in the UK but globally. Check that your representatives know how important it is, and make them understand that we have to act in a global context, not just a local one.
Thanks, Johnny. Sarah, I'm quite certain you'd like to come in on.
I can say about cultured meat.
Vegan, and what about cultured meat? Yeah.
Yes, I couldn't agree more that we answering that question about how do we get lots of change to happen in a coordinated way seems to be the biggest issue. I don't have an answer though, so I shan't say any more about that. But just to comment on the cultured meat, which you both brought up, that yes, so cultured meat, most of the climate impact of that is due to energy requirements that we could use renewable energy for example. And so that's also true for something like precision fermentation, or also mycoprotein, for example, corn. So there's these issues that we can actually produce, a quality protein with much less impact on climate change, but also much less land, which is very crucial because that's really driving the deforestation, also causing geopolitical conflict and wars. For example, you could argue that's and also relevant to Ukraine. So on the other hand, I'd also like to make the point that you don't actually need high-tech new foods in order to solve the problems. There are actually a wide range of existing foods which cause a lot less climate impact. For example, pulses like beans and chickpeas and lentils, which you may or may not like. So maybe that's another job for the entrepreneurs there, since you're asking what to do to really make something that's really mainstream and attractive, healthy, affordable out of more regular foodstuffs as well, without necessarily needing the big technological innovations that we're talking about with something like cultured meat. So I shall stop there, I think. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'd just like to make a small comment on the point about the veganism point, because I was part of the team working on the National Food Strategy. And in the throes of thinking through the recommendations, we were testing a lot of the proposals with groups of citizens. And what was very noticeable is that people's sort of appetite for government intervention around things that people classically think of as junk food, things that are high in sugar in particular, there was a high appetite for that. A very different level, very different type of conversation when you talk to them about meat, which is kind of it was interesting given that, the food environments around us shape our decisions when it comes to junk food and the dominance of meat in lots and lots of dishes and in particular settings. So, yeah, I thought that was sort of interesting in terms of perhaps where we are as a nation on the journey and thinking about what we're eating and the connections that people are making between different types of food and different global problems or national problems. That's not to say we shouldn't be doing it. I'm just saying there's sort of a bit of a temperature test we got from when we were talking to people. Let's bring in some others. Yes, please.
I would like somebody to explain that going for organic meat doesn't solve the problem, because it's impossible to have all these land where animals can roam free in these pastures that are not with pesticides and all the stuff that is unsustainable at global scale. Yeah. And as well, the second thing is, I have seen that many parents, it's not they don't have time, it's that it's not a priority. As far as they have eaten and go to sleep, that's it. And they have lost the skills about cooking, for example, pulses. That is one of the cheapest things. So when people say, oh, it's because it's cheaper, it's not true. Because it's cheaper to go for a casserole that you can make and you can freeze it. And to eat like that is quite cheap. So I think they lost the skills, and we have to introduce this at school, because it's the only way the change will be in other generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we bring in somebody else before we go back to the panel?
Michael York from the York Food Festival. Just as a general observation to both the panel and anybody in the audience, the Food Festival starts 22nd September, and if anybody wants to, but now is our programming planning stage. So if anybody wanted to actually put on a workshop, deliver a demonstration, whatever, come and talk to me. Actually, my question has been half stolen, because it was essentially the same one. Would the panel like to comment on why it is that actually we seem to be weaker in terms of our domestic cooking or our that resource base to actually make simple food ourselves? And what is perhaps to extend that slightly, what is the damage that causes in terms of our then reliance on bog off authors and generally being unable to access foods that are unfamiliar in certain ways? It strikes me that is one of those key things. And is it true? I'm conscious that terrible cooks have always existed. Let me put it that way.
That's right. Great questions. Thank you. Chloe, I think let's bring you in at this point.
So many big complex questions coming through. I suppose, here representing the Soil Association, I ought to plug organic meat production. You're right to say, our diets do need to change. We can't just sustain our level of meat consumption and switch to organic production, even though, it will have, organic production has a less serious greenhouse gas emissions than standard industrial agriculture. And I would say, from so many perspectives, from an animal welfare perspective, from a water pollution perspective, an efficiency of calorie production perspective, meat consumption needs to come down. So I would agree with you, though equally having livestock on a farm is a really helpful contributor as well to soil health, and a diverse farm will help us to produce healthier food in the round. So changes to diets are going to be really difficult politically. I think moderation has to be the message, and thinking about eating less but better meat, and thinking about, I think Sainsbury's have done quite good work around this actually, suggesting palatable dishes that provide a blend of pulses and meats, which I think is a nice way to overcome the issue that you're describing, Anna. Again, massive question from Michael as well about the sort of acceptability side of things, and this kind of 3 A's of food security around affordability, accessibility and acceptability. And I think the work that needs to happen, I think, and is often neglected, is work with very young infants in their kind of first 1,000 days. And there's some brilliant, very small projects that are happening in the UK, and some brilliant nurseries that we're working with that are really trying to boost that acceptability. Palates are so suggestible at that time of life, and it's the time to get small children used to bitter and used to texture, so that you can cope with eating vegetables later, and pulses we keep coming back to later in your life. But in the 80s, food education was really deprioritized, and there's a big generational shift that's needed around that. So I think that acceptability piece needs to be prioritized, and it needs to be prioritized at the very youngest age, along with tackling the saturation of really palatable, high fat, high sugar, high salt convenience foods that are on the market and that we all have, I'm sure, enjoyed in our time.
I mean, is it? Hello? Yeah. So I would like to come back to your point as well. So our school used to teach food tech, which was children learning about food, but all they were doing was writing facts in their books. And our teacher realized that that's not how children learn how to cook food. So now they've changed it. It has cost a lot of money, but they still changed it. And now every child, whenever they come, they have at least one term where they learn about food, and they cook food rather than just learn about it. So they are this practical. And I feel like more school needs to have this, because as Chloe mentioned, it's in schools when you teach children, because they will go on and colleges and all, so they will be opting for the unhealthier options just because they cannot cook food. But if we just teach them how to cook the basic necessities and make it core, it will just solve lots of problems. And that's where I come back to your point, what do we need to do? We need to promote more practical food cooking in schools.
Thanks, Laiba. I'd be really interested to do a little bit of a poll, because we're talking about there's sort of two big buckets of things that we've been talking about. One is the sort of skills bucket, like food education, teaching people to cook, those kinds of life skills at the end of the day. And we're also talking about a bunch of things which are around the environments in which we are making decisions, back to, can we access the market at a particular time of day? Is the place where we're shopping flooded with highly processed, cheap junk food? I'd be interested to know, if you were to pick one of those two things to get the government to do something about, which one would you pick? Hands up if you'd pick the changing of the environments in which we're shopping and buying and eating foods. Okay, or the first one, which is skills and education.
Oh gosh, can you choose one of them?
Okay, interesting. So it's quite mixed, and probably, and if you do, could you do both? Then presumably lots of people would want to do both, or not.
Yeah, I do research in food insecurity amongst children's food, and I think that focusing on cooking skills is a real distraction from the real issues. I was on a panel with somebody last week who lives in York, actually, and talked about, so this is an anecdote, but the research doesn't show that it isn't because people can't cook and that their diets are poor. And she talked about when her children was young and she had an adequate household income and she knows how to cook, and she brought her children up when they were younger eating she's a vegetarian and had an amazing diet. And then, because of what happened to her and she was reliant on benefits, the mental health issues, the stress, the time issues, the not having enough money to put money on your meter to be able to cook hot food, all of those things are the things that make a difference to people being able to cook. And I think if we focus on skills, we let the food, the supermarkets and the government get away with not making the changes they need to make. The research shows that people in low-income households, when you give them more money, they buy healthier food. It's really clear that it's an income-based relationship.
Thank you. Right, we are almost out of time. I'd like to just give really a quick little final reflection from each of the panel. I mean, sort of a minute really, because that's all the time that we've got. It's been a really good conversation, and I think the questions have really got into the heart of some of the really thorny issues around thinking about how we change the food system. But Sarah, what are your reflections?
Well, I think really what we're all coming down to is the fact that we don't have at the moment a sort of mandate for change in this country around the food system. And if you think back 5 years, what happened with plastics in the last 5 years, that we've really had this sea change in public opinion, which is now driving politicians, food producers, supermarkets to tout their new policies around plastic. How do we get that same kind of transformation in people really demanding food system change in this country?
Brilliant. Very good question as we
Just a question.
approach, an election moment, not too far ahead. Chloe.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much echo that. So much buzzing around in my head after a very lively conversation. I would very much like to emphasise the opportunity that we've got here in York over the coming months. We've got a new executive that are committed, although I think they're not quite sure yet how they're going to pay for it, to free school meals for all primary pupils. And I think it's a massive opportunity to do a bit of a micro test of how we can use public money for public good, not just the health, but also thinking about the supply chain, thinking about all the brilliant producers we've got around us in North Yorkshire. Sadiq Khan's done some great work in London about it, but this is a bit of a longer term commitment, more than just 1 year. So I think, it's a really great spotlight on York around this, and I'm really excited for everybody in this tent to support the council and put pressure on the council to use that opportunity for social and environmental good.
So if you live in York, watch that space and do everything you can to support that. That'll be music to your ears, Laiba, right?
Yeah. So I just want to say that we have more than enough power to make the government do what we want, because they are basically living on our votes. So they need us and they need our agreement. So if we don't agree with something, all we have to do is tell them. And I know it's very simple, like how I'm saying it. But the thing is, if all of us and many more who want this change speak up, we can do it. It's possible. So mainly, if we have free school meals, which is really a huge thing, it will have a domino effect on generations and generations to come. So my main point is to encourage free school meals, but I feel like the adults, the children, all ages need to just pressure the government to give free school meals to everyone.
Thanks, Laiba. Johnny.
Well, I 100% endorse that in a non-political sense, and I'm pleased to hear you saying, it is when we talk about these things and we put pressure on that politicians do act. One of the reasons they don't act is when they don't feel the pressure. I just wanted to finish on 2 points. One is, on the global scale, things can always seem a bit overwhelming, the scale of the problem. And I think we have to remind ourselves that we have had success in the past. Between 1990 and 2015, we halved the number of people facing extreme hunger in the world. That's going the wrong way now, very significantly. So we can do something about it. But again, there was a lot of public pressure, back in those days, and there isn't in the same way as at the moment. So more public pressure, and we can have success again. And but we need all of you involved in that, whether that's at home here with free school meals, very good thing, or whether it's abroad as well. We can, acting together, we can have success. Thanks.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully that's empowered everybody to get stuck into this agenda as a food activist and get some of these problems solved. So thank you all to a brilliant panel. You've been fantastic. And thank you all for coming and for your really good questions. That's it.